Thank you, California Trails and Greenways, for inviting myself as a representative of Citizens Climate Lobby to speak to you all today. And thank you to all of the conference attendees for your passion for planning, building, and maintaining California's wonderful network of trails and greenways. It's part of what makes California such an amazing place to live. I'm Matt Tucker, and I'm a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, otherwise known as CCL. My primary role at CCL is co-lead of the Outdoor Industry Action Team. I help build the political will within the outdoor industry to advocate for putting a price on carbon, and more specifically, the enactment of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And I'll get back to that in a minute. The photo you see here is of my family skiing together in the backcountry near our home in Truckee, California. I got involved in Citizens Climate Lobby because I care deeply about preserving the world that we live in for our children and grandchildren. My family spends a significant portion of our days together in the great outdoors, skiing, hiking, rock climbing, and surfing. All of these pursuits are what I like to call the canary in the coal mine. Those of us that love the outdoors are feeling the effects of climate change more directly than our more sedentary, homebound fellow citizens. And as such, it's important that we raise the alarm, and more than that, educate ourselves about solutions to climate change and help spread the word and build political will to get those solutions implemented. So the connection between climate change and what you folks are doing is actually pretty direct. So as you've, I'm sure, noticed, wildfires have gotten worse in California in recent years. And of course, that reduces the number of days that folks feel comfortable being out and about enjoying trails and greenways. In addition, climate change is forecast to have more frequent strong storms that will result in damage to all kinds of built infrastructure, but also including trail damage. And as I'm sure most of you would agree, climate change, human-caused climate change, is to blame. I'm actually going to go into a little bit about that though. And then our solution is actually to put a price on carbon and return the revenues directly to households. So this is probably a fairly familiar graph. It shows rising temperatures since 1920. And it's very closely correlated to our carbon emissions. Here's another slide that you may look familiar. The IPCC has something similar, but this shows, the orange would be if we do absolutely nothing. The blue is what we would do, assuming that all nations that have agreed to the Paris Climate Accords actually followed through on their commitments. And then there's the 2-degree and the 1.5 degree Celsius paths. And the reason I bring that up is, well, actually, you'll see in a couple slides here, but let me just give you a quote from Marshall Burke, an earth scientist at Stanford University. He says that in 2020, we saw roughly 60 days, so that's 2 months, with wildfire smoke. And that was up from just 10 to 15 days a decade ago. So I find this graph actually quite illuminating. What it says is, for areas F and G, which covers a vast majority of the area of California, that 1 degree Celsius of warming will result in a 312% or a 231% increase in area burned by wildfires. So we're already up above 1 degree Celsius of warming. So that would account for the increased number of smoky days that we've observed already. But as you may remember from the previous graph, that assuming that we just stick to our Paris Climate Agreement goals, we'll see significantly more, perhaps as much as 2 degrees more of warming. So that would mean that for area F there in red in California, we're looking at a 6x increase in area burned. And for the area G, that would be the equivalent of 4x increase in area of wildfires burned. So obviously quite a catastrophe. In addition, this graphic here was actually created by the UCLA Center on Climate Science in 2020. And it shows that the type of precipitation that we'll experience in the Sierras, as well as the amount of surface runoff, will actually, the surface runoff will increase dramatically, especially at higher elevations. And the shift will be dramatic between what currently is falling as snow to rain. And both of those things will be a 1-2 punch in that it will increase the risk of flooding. And obviously, any kind of flooding or increased runoff has the likely increases trail damage. Okay, so why am I here? What am I advocating for? So Citizens Climate Lobby is advocating for something called carbon fee and dividend. And that carbon fee and dividend policy is actually embodied in the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which was actually originally introduced to Congress in 2018 and then again in 2019. And we're working to get it reintroduced in this Congress. So how does it work? So it puts a price on carbon at the source. That would be the mine, the wellhead, or the crude oil terminal if it's being imported into this country. And then the revenue collected gets distributed to households via a dividend. So the dividend actually would, every individual, every adult gets the same share, and every child gets a half share. And then there's also a carbon border adjustment. So the carbon border adjustment actually is intended to prevent something called carbon leakage. And that is where companies in a country with a price on carbon decide to move their operations outside of those borders to avoid the tax. So what the carbon border adjustment does is it puts a levy on goods coming into our country. And then for our exporters, it would actually give them a rebate if it was shipping to a country without an equivalent price on carbon. So going back to the carbon fee would start at a fairly low number, but it would quickly increase at a steady pace. So it starts at $15 per ton the first year that it gets implemented. And then every subsequent year, it goes up by an additional $10. And it doesn't actually have, there's no endpoint. What happens is that at some point, the amount of carbon emissions starts to decline significantly. The amount of carbon actually taken out of the ground significantly declines. And so you'll see the revenues slowly decline. And so actually the carbon dividend will slowly decline as well. But that's exactly what we want. We want to see the carbon emissions decrease. And so what will it do? So this carbon fee and dividend approach is effective. Studies have shown that within 12 years, there'll be a 40% reduction in carbon emissions. It's good for people in two ways. So first off, it will improve health. So it's estimated that 60,000 people in the US die each year from poor air quality. So obviously reducing the sources of fossil fuel burning will significantly decrease the number of deaths. Not to mention that a significant number of folks are sickened, much more significant than 60,000 people actually are sickened by air pollution. So a significant reduction in that pollution will also reduce our healthcare costs. So another thing that makes it good for people is that it puts money in people's pockets. As I mentioned earlier, each individual gets the same amount. So as it turns out, so that makes it a very progressive tax, if you will, because the lower 3/5 of households will actually break even or come out slightly ahead. So this is actually a little graph of how households will benefit from this, overall will benefit from this. So this is actually taking into account the increase in prices that people will experience due to the tax. So you'll see that, in the lowest quintile, it's quite significant, the number of folks that actually benefit. And then it slowly declines as you go up, but up to the third quintile, it's the majority of people are still benefiting or having a very minor loss. So this is what we would consider to be a progressive policy. So why am I bringing up Canada? Well, it turns out that British Columbia has implemented something similar to, not exactly the same, but similar to what we're proposing. So they put a tax on fossil fuels. And as you can see from the graph, when it started back in 2008, it started at $10 per ton. It's now up to $30 per ton. But what's happened since they implemented that is that fuel use is down, GDP is up, and jobs are up. In fact, the economy in Canada in British Columbia has actually done better than Canada overall during this period. So I think that's it's a great example of how you can implement something like this and it actually can benefit your economy. So to review, it's an effective policy. It will significantly reduce emissions. It creates jobs. It's good for people, both their pocketbooks and their health. Turns out that it's actually something that both sides of the aisle can get behind. And it's revenue neutral, which appeals to some conservatives as well. So if you're interested in seeing how you personally can get involved or how your organization can get involved, you can reach out to me. I've got you see my email down there. You can also go to the energyinnovationact.org. That's a great resource where you can learn more about our policy, and actually you can endorse as either an individual if you have if you're a CEO or lead an organization, or you can endorse as a company or organization. And then you can also, if you want to get involved individually, you can go to citizensclimatelobby.org. You'll find out a lot more information about our organization and how we do what we do. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.